Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session, Personal Experiences, Risks, and Benefits of Clinical Trial Participation. I'm excited to be here today. I'm Kim Smith Whitley. I'm the Director of the Comprehensive Sickle Cell Center at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and I will be the moderator for this session. I'm very excited to have 4 panelists joining me today. The structure of this session is going to be that I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves, to tell us a little bit about themselves. And then after that initial introduction, we'll circle back and we'll get a better understanding of their personal experience with clinical trial participation. We have several questions lined up. We've been in the Q&A box and tried to incorporate the questions that were there into the structure of the questions that we will be addressing today. But if you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to place them in the chat box. So we're going to go around and start with introductions. Jennifer, I think you're up first.
Thank you, Dr. Whitley. My name is Jennifer Nsenkyrie, and I'm originally from Ghana, West Africa. I was born with sickle cell disease and lived with it for a long time. I moved to the United States in 1995 to attend college. And somehow I found my way at NIH for care. And then in 2010, I was offered the opportunity to undergo stem cell transplant, which I did. And thankfully, I got cured of not only sickle cell disease, but also of MS. And so since then, I've written an autobiography describing my journey from birth up until the transplant point. And the title of my book is My Pool of Bethesda, A Place of Transformation and Healing. And I call it My Pool of Bethesda because in my eyes, I got my healing from sickle cell disease at NIH in Bethesda, Maryland. And this healing has not only provided me with a new life, but also a transformation. So that's why I call it a place of healing and transformation. Thank you.
Thank you. And then next we're joined by Ms. Wilson, who is the mother of Kimberlyn Wilson George, who could not join us today. And her mother was gracious enough to come and fill in for her daughter. So Ms. Wilson, I'll have you introduce yourself. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie Wilson, the mother of Kimberlyn Wilson. I'm a mother of 8. I have 7 had 7 biological children. My son just passed a few weeks ago. He was the firstborn, 49. And I adopted a son who made 18. So I'm a mother of 8. And thanking God, Kimberlyn is the second oldest. And she was born with sickle cell. And at age, let's see, I think it was 7 because the bone marrow was in 83, 8. So she used to always go to the hospital with sickle cell and get over it and stay there a week. And then all of a sudden, this one week, everything went well. And then all of a sudden they were telling us that, you know, her blood work came out so differently. And I'm like, what? I couldn't believe it because she was up and at it, ready to go home. And I'm like, wow. So they said they need to call in specialists because we were at the hospital in Baton Rouge, because that's where I'm from, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So they called in different specialists and they were like, I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? I have to really trust this because Kimberlyn looks well, no illness. Just, you know, she had this crisis and we know we get over the crisis and go home. So anyway, they did so many tests and they said, we're not understanding because number 1, she has sickle cell. And here we have taken this test, a bone marrow, and it's like she has cancer. So they were like, we don't know how to deal with this. We've never seen this before, a person with 2 blood diseases. So they immediately called St. Jude Hospital. And from the hospital in our hometown, we were immediately transferred to the airplane and at St. Jude right then and there. It was like it was a hurried, you know, situation. So when we got to St. Jude Hospital, I'm still like, okay, what's going on? And they shared with me, they did some more tests, several bone marrows, and they said, well, I can tell you this one thing. After they did all these tests, they came to me and said, your daughter, which we've never seen before, have the adult leukemia, which is called AML. And they said, well, seen before meaning they never seen no one with sickle cell disease and then have cancer, the AML disease. And they said, well, we don't know, we're in Oz, but we have something going on right now, which was a clinical trial of the bone marrow transplant. So they were saying, well, I could tell you this, if you all make that decision, find out if you have any donors, and if you make a decision, she would be, you know, cured of sickle cell. And I had already prayed when she was like 2 years old for a healing for her body. I had went in prayer when she was 2, and this was like, she was like 7 at this point because she got cured when she was 8 in that springtime. So what happened when they told me that, I didn't worry about nothing else. I was just very receptive to, okay, God, this is my healing. Bam, it don't matter what anybody says. So they did tell me, they said, well, we need to get something going. We give her 3 months to live. But you know, I didn't even worry about the 3 months they were talking about because I had already prayed and asked God for this healing. So I was excited. It didn't matter. They said 3 months to live. You know, my husband was all upset, and we shared with other people. They were kind of, you know, upset and in odds about it. But I knew that this was her time. This was her time to be cured of sickle cell. And her body went through a whole lot, I tell you, with that bone marrow transplant. She had graft versus host. She developed that. And it was really a trying time for a whole year. I mean, but I still kept the faith and kept going. But I just, you know, wanted to share that. And at this point, after she got over that, and while in the hospital, she went to school. She never gave up. She was a very, very strong and determined young lady, because she studied in school, and they were saying, wow, people who usually come to St. Jude really, you know, be so sick, they don't be wanting to study. But she, you know, did her studies there, and she went to a private school, so the school came and visited her at St. Jude. They never had that done before. So we were all excited, and everybody was just excited about her being cured of sickle cell after that transplant. And then we were just, you know, go home, and we had to travel home every week, and it was really something. But we were excited about that, her being the first person to be cured. Oh my gosh, that was excited. But the one thing was, and she shared too, that she was not able to have children. That was the only setback that she, you know, had discovered at that time. But she realized, and she did share, that she thanked God for her life because she was able to go to school, go to college, complete it, and she had her own daycare. And then she taught school. So she did have children, and she was involved with children. And she's really, you know, blessed. And she have 2 children now. She's married, and she have 2 children that her husband had 2, and she raised them since they were a baby. And then she have an adopted child. So she's been blessed with children, and she's, you know, feel great about that. And today she was 8 then with the transplant, and today she's 46. So we are just thankful now. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. That's an inspiring story. Tiana Wolford.
Okay, hi everybody. I am Tiana. I live in Baltimore, Maryland. I was born with sickle cell SS hemoglobin. I'm 29 years old. I'm a psychology student and full-time sickle cell advocate. And I just want to say to Ms. Wilson, this is a full circle moment. I had the opportunity to meet your daughter face-to-face, well, virtually, 2 weeks ago, and it was incredible for me because I also had the bone marrow transplant, and it was maybe 8 years ago. I was really depressed when I got my infertility diagnosis, and someone took me to your daughter's tribute at St. Jude, and she has literally been an inspiration to me for the last 10 years. So this is a full circle moment, and I'm honored to be on this panel with you. Great. And all of you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Shirley Miller.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shirley Miller. I currently live in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I spent a lot of time living in Dallas, Texas. I am 64 years old with hemoglobin SS, and I do really, really
nice.
well. And I have had not that many problems with sickle cell as an adult. Most of my problems were when I was much, much younger. And I have done most of my clinical trials at the NIH, and I saw we had a question about, do you have to be a resident? I lived in Dallas, Texas, and I flew to Bethesda, Maryland to have participate in the clinical trials. And the reason I did that was because I always worked and I always had private insurance, but private insurance would not let you do clinical trials. They felt like at that time it was experimental or whatever, so they wouldn't pay for it. So I knew I could go to the NIH and have the tests and the clinical trials there free of charge, and it wouldn't impact my insurance. What else do I want to say? I did the pulmonary hypertension, I did leg ulcers, I did the 6-minute walk and the long-term follow-up for sickle cell, and everything. I'm happy I was able to take part in it. I am the author of the book, The Stranger Within Me. My pen name is Shirley Renee, and I'm so glad to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. So you all have such inspiring stories, and I'm hoping that we can share a little bit about how you made the decision to participate in the clinical trials. So I'm hoping that we can go through and talk about how you made the decision. But in that also, talk to me also about the challenges that you may have experienced and whether or not you have any regrets about your clinical trial participation. We're going to start with you, Ms. Jennifer.
Okay, so when I was presented with the option to undergo stem cell transplant, it was presented to me because I was one of the sickest patients at NIH at the time. And so the team figured that this would be an out for me. So one of the challenges I faced was the initial lack of support from my family due to the risks involved. And so it took me some time to convince them to get on my side. The other challenge I faced was the fear of the unknown, fear of death, and fear of complications. And then also I had to reconcile my dream of being a mother with the possibility of not having children at all. And so I struggled with that decision for some time, but I came to the conclusion that there were a lot of kids in the world that needed to be adopted. And so if I ever got to that point, that adoption would be my option. I also struggled, with the thought that if it was worth putting my donor through the harvesting process, could I trust the medical team? Would it be a success? And then also, how would my family deal with my demise if it ever came to that point? So these were things that I had to think about deeply for a long period of time before I made the decision to move forward.
Thank you for sharing that. Ms. Stephanie, can you talk about the experience that you had prior to your daughter's transplant and what you were counseled would be some of the potential complications and whether or not you have any regrets about the decisions that you made?
Okay, thank you. As I said, earlier, I just had to really trust because she was not. When I went to St. Jude, the children, and I spoke with mothers, were ill when they had gotten there, but Kimberlyn wasn't sick at all. So I had to really trust the doctors and what they were saying and the tests that they were giving. That's where I really had to really trust, because I'm like, she's not sick. And I hear, from parents, their children were ill, but she isn't. So, but I don't regret, because at that time, it was so many children dying every day. And bone marrow transplant at that time was experimental. They did share that with me, that it, you know, would be a chance that I would be taking. So it was going to be, you know, my husband and I choice to decide whether we wanted to do it or not. But to be honest, her health was at stake. She had the 2 blood diseases. She had the cancer. So we were just really forced, like in terms of, okay, you want her to live or you want her to die. So the thing of it is, we made that decision for her health at that time. It was like, this is what we had to do. And I don't regret it, as I said, because I'm really excited that she did went through it, and you know, it saved her life. And you know, we're able to spend a lot more time. You know, she lived a long time and still living, and we're thankful for that. So that's why I don't regret it at all. And as I said, it was a very trying time, but I was really excited, even though I was in a time and children were coming up after taking the bone marrow transplant. They were dying because it was experimental, but I had that faith that she was going to make it through. So I never did, I didn't doubt anything, and I just went on, and I tried to encourage the parents that were there with their children. That's what I did during my time, and that what really helped me. But I'm glad that we did make that decision. But I mean, she was young, and so she didn't have any part in it at that time. But I would share with her what had happened as she became older. And I used to tell her story. And I used to tell her that one day you'll be able to tell your own story. But I thank God that he did not allow her to remember the harsh times, because those were some interesting times. Believe me, where we couldn't see her. I mean, we could see her, but we couldn't touch her. And we had this window separating us, and I just took my hands, and we take our hands and just touch her by the window. It was very, very trying. And just with the graft versus hostess, it really was changing her body. And, you know, watching that was a trying time to watch her body change through that, because it's like the graft versus host, it burned her entire body. It looked like it was a person that had gotten burned, but we went through that and we got through it, and here we are.
Thank you. Tiana?
Okay, so my answer is similar to Jennifer's. When I made the decision to go through the haplotransplant, I was really sick, and I was presented with this by my pediatric hematologist. They wanted me to get on the Be the Match registry, and like so many of us, I did not have a match. So we have to talk more about getting African-American donors on the registry. So fast forward, we found out that there was a protocol at Hopkins where they were doing half matches. So my mother or my father was automatically going to be my donor. And I remember going into my consult, and I already felt defeated because I just felt like I wasn't living the quality of life that I wanted to live. I was spending so much time in the hospital. So I went into my consult in a depressed state. And I was presented with this opportunity. And honestly, looking back, I feel like the risks were kind of glossed over, and this sunny picture was painted for me about, you know, just do this transplant, your whole life is going to change, and if you don't do it, I'm worried that you're going to die. And it was the same as Jennifer and Miss Kimberlin. I had a fear of the infertility, and I remember expressing that, and this doctor looking me in my face and telling me that I shouldn't even be worried about the transplant making me infertile because I was probably already infertile due to sickle cell disease. So I also found out that same day that I had a silent stroke that I didn't know about. So I really made that decision out of desperation, feeling like I didn't have another choice. And as far as the challenges, I think, you know, a lot of you know my story. I went through the chemo, the radiation, and unfortunately, about 3 months in, things just went all the way left, and I spiked a really high fever. My counts were out of control. I wasn't really making any platelets, so I was at risk for hemorrhaging and all types of infections, and I stayed in the hospital for about 4 months. So it was very difficult. It was hard on me, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It was hard on my family to watch me go through that, but that was 10 years ago. So fast forward to now, and we're having a conversation about regrets. I have to say that I could honestly, I've had some cancer scares and I am infertile, so I could do without that. But as far as regrets, I really don't regret it because all these years later, I am now on the gene therapy protocol working group, making official recommendations for that. And I am publishing with the American Society of Hematology, and there's so many tables that I get to sit at and share my story. So I don't have any regrets. I feel like all that pain from 10 years ago has literally pushed me into my purpose.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for sharing. Shirley Miller, can you talk to us about some of the challenges around clinical trial participation and a comment on whether or not you have any regrets?
Yes, I think some of the challenges have been that maybe patients don't really understand what the trial is about. And I think a lot of times when I started my first trial, they didn't give you a lot of, they didn't take a lot of time to explain it, nor were their patients involved in the actual design of the study. But all of the ones that I did at the NIH, I have no regrets. Actually, I was a person that wanted to know more about my disease and more about my chances for living a good life. So these tests helped me to understand, if I was going to live a good quality of life, if I was going to have any organ damage or things that I needed to work on. More so, I ran toward that because I wanted to know. I did not want to be a person that ran from the truth or didn't take into consideration, what might be going on inside my body and ignore it. That wasn't my way. So I was very happy to participate in the clinical trials. And they make it very easy for you at the NIH. They will fly you there. They will put you up. They will do whatever they need to do to help to accommodate you. It's not like you have to pay for it yourself. So I totally am very happy that I was able, I have no regrets for participating in clinical trials.
So one of the things I think that you all have summed up so nicely is that when we think about what the sickle cell community has as a result of clinical trial participation, I just want to take a minute to recognize the heroes that you all are, the sheroes that you all are. Because as you all know, when we're talking about risk and benefits of clinical trial participation, for many studies, there's a process called informed consent, right? Where someone sits you down and hopefully somebody that you trust and know and talks to you about the risk and the benefits of that participation in that trial. And I think that already in the chat box, there are a lot of questions that are popping up, particularly around whether or not someone talked to you fully about those risks and benefits. There are questions about who the donors were for you all and whether or not they understood the risk and benefits. And I know that that doesn't include Ms. Shirley right now, but could you talk to us about that informed consent process and who the donors were for transplant and whether or not they were also informed of the risk and benefits?
Yes, so for me, when I was first presented with the idea of going in for the transplant, I was excited. And all I heard was being cured of sickle cell. All I was looking at was the end result. I didn't take time to consider the steps involved, what I'd have to go through, what my donor would have to go through. I told my doctor, when can we get on this? And then she was like, you know, well, hold up, Jennifer, you need time to think about this. We need time to discuss this. So she walked me through everything, the complications, the risks involved, and then also that of my donor, and my donor was my mom. So she told me all about it. And she said, I'm going to give you time to discuss this with your family, think about it. You don't have to do it, but if it's something you want to do, I need you to think about it. So I sat down with my family, discussed all the pros and cons. And as I had mentioned earlier, initially, my family didn't support my decision to go through with this, you know, because of the risks involved. And then I considered, you know, the challenges, you know, like infertility, the risk of complications, graft versus host disease. I considered all of that and took my time to analyze it and see what sacrifices this involved, what I was willing to give up, sacrifice for this process, what my family was willing to sacrifice for it. And then I finally made the decision to move forward. But even with that, it took about a year before they actually did the transplant, because they had to get my body in a good place to receive the cells. And so it was a preparation process that took about a year. So I made that decision not on a whim. Even though I was ready to move forward, knowing everything involved, it took some time for me to reconcile all of these things, not only with my family, but also with myself and my beliefs. And so I was also made aware that if I ever did start, at whatever point I wanted to back out, they'll be okay with it. It wasn't, that you're signing off your life and you have to stick with it. And so that information made me comfortable with moving forward with the process. Yeah.
I just kind of want to piggyback off of something that Jennifer said, because I think what you said about only looking at that cure is so important. And, we've had conversations before, because with what happened to me, I get that all the time. People are like, well, you knew the risk when you signed up. But I really think that a part of that informed consent process, there should be a mental health specialist in there with you and really walking you through the process before and after you make that decision. Because I told you guys, I was in a depressed state when I made this decision. And so 10 years ago, you could have told me you might get leukemia, this could happen, but I wasn't really thinking about any of that. I just knew I didn't want to live with sickle cell. And so I get this question from the community a lot about what kind of advice I would give them. And I never want anyone to think that I am sharing my story to be negative or to scare anyone from pursuing a curative therapy, because that is not what I'm trying to do. I think it's just important that we have all the information and that we really evaluate and examine what a cure means to you and what you're willing to risk and give up. And we have to have honest conversations and really weigh the risk and the benefits. So I'm glad you asked that question.
Thank you. Ms. Stephanie, is there anything that we should think about in the informed consent process that we should be doing differently? Would you have recommended that the team who talked to you about what would happen had mentioned something or done something differently?
I would say they did do a whole lot, but as I shared with you, I was with time in terms of the 2 blood diseases. It was like, you either do it or you don't, she's gonna die. So that's what we were. But even so with that, they did have me. I spoke with a psychiatrist because of what was getting ready to go on. And the donor that we had 2 that we could choose from. And I chose my son at the time, who was 5 years old. And they did talk with him. They shared with him. They took a doll and they showed him what was going to be going on with him doing, the transformation of the bone marrow from him to Kimberlin. And they did tell us that he was not going to experience any side effects. And we have not, from that time, experienced any from, his bone marrow in reference to her, which is, we are blessed to know that. but and I was hearing what the others had said and shared, and I'm in agreement in terms of, I think it was it Jennifer? I'm sorry, who just spoke?
Oh, that's
Sorry, no,
Tiana just
Sharon, I'm sorry, sweetheart. But she, you know, in terms of having like a mental health specialist there, because she was very depressed at the time to even share. And I didn't get the age she was at that time.
Tiana.
I was 19.
Yeah, see, she's older. So my thing was, that was very, very important to have someone there to share, you know, all of that. In terms of the informed consent, that with this and that was going to happen. Now we were told, and I'm, you know, thankful that we were shared that after the bone, you know, having the bone marrow transplant, because of that cobalt radiation, that in the future, 20 years later, 30 years later, this is what's going to happen to Kimberlyn. We were told this, so that means that, you know, at some point in time, I knew that her body was going to go through so many different things. But as was shared earlier, all I looked for was the cure. Was excited about the cure, and you know, that was it. As long as she was cured from this, she didn't have to be going through all these pain crises, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, that was the informed consent, having someone there to really share about what's going to really happen. And this is, you know, this is not going to be, you know, what you think is going to be, and just giving them that really support that they need to make that, you know, decision. And, you know, because being very depressed with all of that is very, very serious, especially at that age right there.
No, I agree. I think that one of the things that is revealing about listening to your stories as well is that over the years, so much has changed in the clinical trial space. We're better, hopefully, about doing informed consent, whether or not it's for curative therapies or for clinical trials in general. And so I wanted to ask Shirley specifically, one of the things that we as providers are responsible for doing is really trying to make sure that the care that individuals receive while participating in clinical trials is accessible and high quality care. That should be at baseline, whether or not you're being in a clinical trial or not, right? That should be at baseline. And so in thinking about making sure that that clinical care is high quality, can you talk about how maybe that journey has impacted on eligibility criteria for clinical trial participation, specifically when we look at curative therapies for sickle cell disease now and other experimental, other clinical trial participation? Can you talk about kind of like that upper limit age that is set, often a 40, 45 that you see in these trials?
Well, I've been around long enough to know that there were many clinical trials prior to the ones going on now that failed because they didn't have enough recruitment and because they couldn't get people to participate. So bottom line, I think we have to do a better job of educating people about clinical trials so that they won't have these fears or these myths about what's going to happen to me if I do join the clinical trial. I remember going to many meetings where the age limit for a person with sickle cell was like in the 40s. And I'm like, why is it in the 40s? They considered people in their 40s to be old with sickle cell. And I'm like, well, I'm 60 something. So are you saying that I'm not worthy or I shouldn't have the same chance to take advantage of the clinical trials? And I think they heard me because a lot of the clinical trials now, they don't have an age limit on it, or they've made it out to 85 or so, which is good because I don't think it should be the pharmaceuticals choice to say that this person cannot be in this clinical trial. It should be their doctor to say whether they are healthy enough to be in a clinical trial or whether it would benefit them to be in a clinical trial. So things have changed a lot. There is a lot more patient participation, patient education about clinical trials. And I think that we just have to do more because we don't need these trials to fail because of lack of recruitment. We need to make sure there are more and more drugs. We don't want to stop at the ones that we have right now. We want to be able to have more out there so everybody has a choice and everybody has something that could benefit them.
Thank you, Shirley. And also, I just want to say, we're going to try to make sure that this is in the chat box, but Shirley has also participated in the development of videos for FDA, NIH, PCORI maybe as well, but I think that we have some links to at least the ones on FDA's website about the importance of clinical trial participation. So Shirley, thank you. We will definitely share those. I think one of the things that has come up also in the context of clinical trial participation is the African-American experience. And often we hear that individuals with sickle cell disease don't participate in trials. And, you know, I guess there's so many of us in this community that do. Can you talk to me about your experiences in this journey as an African-American woman, and whether or not you feel like there was any difference in care, either due to another diagnosis like MS or from some other aspect? Can you talk about that?
So my experience, I've been with NIH since '96. And so prior to the stem cell transplant, I was also in the hydroxyurea clinical study, among others. And as far as being in a clinical trial, initially, you know, when you tell somebody that you're in a clinical trial, you know, there was so much negativity, at least in the late '90s when I first started. You know, why are you giving yourself up, you know, as, you know, for them to try these things on you? Is it worth it? There was so much negativity, but things have changed since then. Being on these clinical trials, I've not experienced anything, any treatment differently being a female in it. But I'll say that having another underlying condition like MS in my case has kind of impacted the care, because that disease has to be considered in whatever treatment they're giving me. For example, when I had the MS, I couldn't be on steroids for a long period of time. And so all of those things had to be in consideration for my treatment. Also, some of these trials, as I said earlier, have impacted, you know, fertility in my case, where now I cannot have kids naturally. And so being on these trials, I really, as a female, have to think about the impact it's having on my life. Not only my life as a human being, but also my life as in having children or doing other things that I want in life. But thankfully, being a...
Oh, we lost you. I think Jennifer.
He's on mute.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Okay. So as I was saying, being at NIH has been very helpful to me, where they have been supportive. I remember when I was having the stem cell transplant and I told them about having children, they gave me the option to find a facility to harvest my eggs and save them. But unfortunately, I couldn't afford that. So the decision was on me to move forward without harvesting my eggs. And so all of these things play into my decision making whenever I'm on a clinical trial. I look to the future, what I want to do, how these clinical trials will allow me to do whatever it is I want to do. And most importantly, I also have at the back of my mind that these clinical trials that I get into, even if it does not work for me, I have a nephew who has sickle cell disease. I have a younger sister who has sickle cell disease. So I always see it as an opportunity for the doctors to perfect whatever it is they're doing, so that my sister will have a chance, so that my nephew will have a chance, whether it's medication or a curative therapy. Even if it doesn't work for me, at least they'll have an opportunity to live a better life.
Thank you. Ms. Stephanie?
Yes.
Any experiences that you had that you think impacted you or your daughter differently because you were a person of color or because you all were females in this process?
In the process, I don't feel during that particular time that whether it was, it didn't impact us because of our, you know, heritage at all, or being our female. It didn't, yeah, I don't think it did at all. But everything, because of the fact that she was cured of sickle cell, so everything was really toward the cancer part, and that's what we, you know, had experienced a lot of that during that particular time. But then I did get pregnant, and I had a daughter in 1983, the same year, in that December. Well, no, she was born in September. She had sickle cell, but I did find out that she could not have the bone marrow transplant because she didn't have any other disease that was like life-threatening. But listening today to all of you all, you know, because she's had 3 children, her sickle cell now is really rising up in terms of she's having more crisis. So, you know, I'm thinking that, you know, we need to be educated more in terms of finding out what can help her, because she's experiencing a lot of challenges right now with her body that we are really, really concerned. So, you know, but as terms of a female, I don't see that. The thing of it is we need a lot of more education, as was said previously, in terms of the clinical trials, because, you know, like I did with the bone marrow transplant, you know, I have another daughter, she's in her 30s. So I'm really concerned about, you know, her health too. So this is going to really help. And, you know, I'm glad that everyone have shared, because I want her to find out more so she can live a better life herself. We know that she can't have any more children. Bam, she don't need to have any more. The doctors have told her that having children would be a death to her if she have another one because of her sickle cell. So, you know, we want to deal, I mean, I don't want to say it in that terms, but, you know, 3 is enough, and it has been very tearing on her body because of the sickle cell. But I want to be educated to find out what can help her have a more productive life continually.
So that really segues into, I'm just going to change this a little bit and really talk about when you speak to this community, you're speaking to individuals living with sickle cell disease, you're speaking to healthcare providers, you're speaking to those in the pharmaceutical industry. Where should we be for advocating for differences, particularly for women and girls with sickle cell disease who participate in these trials? Tiana, could you talk to us about what we should be doing?
Absolutely. You guys, Dr. Whitley and I are kind of in cahoots with this question. So I am ready, and I am bringing a lot of emotion and passion to this. So I hope I deliver this graciously, that we have to focus our advocacy efforts into preserving fertility for people, for girls, and for guys too, who want to have a family. Even if they think they don't want a family, we have to give them that option. And I'm going to be honest with you, when I found out that these gene therapy trials were happening and egg freezing was not a part of the protocol, I was livid. But the advocate in me, and you know, the type of person that I am, I just want to focus on righting wrongs. So I'm hoping that as they seek FDA approval, they will implement that into their protocol. And then we have to take that a step further, because by some miracle, if you can afford to freeze your eggs, you go back and you can't afford to do the IVF. So we have to really figure out how to address that. And I'm so passionate about it because I get a lot of calls from families who are trying to base the decision of whether to pursue these options based on if there's an option for fertility preservation. And I just think that with all you're already going through, that extra burden should not have to be shouldered by the patients and the families. So I'm taking all this raw emotion, all this passion, and Dr. Lydia Pecker and we are starting an organization centered around reproductive health, and Dr. Whitley has graciously agreed to be a part, and that is one of the things that we'll be focusing on, is really how to offer that, because this is a beautiful community of people and we really do deserve better.
That's right.
Well stated. So Shirley, I'm going to ask you a different question, but kind of like towards some of these themes for the differences that we talked about in the informed consent, in the clinical trial participation. One of the things that's striking to me is that we have penicillin because of clinical trial participation. So we have infection prevention for those living with sickle cell disease starting in the newborn period, because certain families participated in clinical trials decades ago. We have pediatrics, we have stroke prevention, we have hydroxyurea. But it seems now that we are also lucky enough that we have 2 FDA-approved therapies in 2019 and then 1 in 2017, so that we have a number of disease-modifying therapies, but they've come up in the pharmaceutical industry as opposed to penicillin and hydroxyurea that came through academic centers. Talk about what we need to do as providers, as looking at the responsibility of the stakeholders involved in clinical trials as to giving feedback to those who participate about what the trial results are. Can you talk to me about whether or not in any of your participation, whether or not you heard back about any of the results that stemmed from those trials?
Yes, I got a report. I remember from a couple of the clinical trials I got. And what I did with it is I took it to my hematologist so that she could transcribe what it really meant to me. And, but other than that, there was no, I got one call asking me how the trial went. And I had some advice for them to make it easier on future patients who were going through that trial. So I was able to do that, but you really don't hear a lot about, you know, well, at that time, I should say, when I was doing clinical trials, I really didn't hear a lot about the results and what it meant and everything, but I did have the wherewithal to go to my hematologist and say, what does this mean? You know, and it was like, you don't have pulmonary hypertension. Woo-hoo, you know, happy about that. And, but I think we need to give more information about what the results are, how many people benefited and everything. But even if we have that information, there's still a lot of people who are being left out, because there's a lot of people in rural areas who don't live near a comprehensive center, don't have a hematologist, that won't be able to take advantage of this. So the thing is, we have to understand that we have to spread the education out a little further, because there's a lot of people who can't take advantage of this, don't have the resources to take advantage of it. And we need to be able to help those people. And so I know now pharmaceutical companies are coming up with support to help pay for some of these drugs. But does everybody know about that? You can get support for the drugs, you know, if you do not have the money to pay for the drugs, especially when the drug first comes out, it's very, very expensive. So I think we need to spread our wings a little bit more and don't just talk among ourselves, but get the information out to other people, because they deserve to know also, and they deserve to have a better quality of life just like the rest of us.
So well stated, Shirley. And I know that so many in the pharmaceutical industries are trying to make sure that access is there for different programmatic concerns. But I think that one of the other things that I just wanted to touch on, because I'm looking at our time and I can't believe we only have 10 minutes left. I don't know where the time went, because I could sit here and talk to you ladies probably for the rest of the afternoon, because this has been so educational. One of the things that I think also plays into what is different about our community right now is social media is present. And so talk to me about what you vision being a benefit of social media in this environment and its relationship to clinical trial participation. And we can talk about many different aspects, whether or not it's access to clinical trials. Is there an option other than clinicaltrials.gov? If it's communication through other websites about where trials are available. Also about, we know that in the sickle cell community, it is somewhat isolating to be living with sickle cell disease. And now that we see people being pulled into our community through social media, what's the best way to educate them about clinical trial participation? And I'm going to start with Jennifer.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Whitley. So the best way to educate is, number one, social media. Social media, everybody has their phone at their fingertips and they're always, you know, online doing something, either by Facebook, Instagram, whatever. So my advice and suggestion would be to connect with people in that manner. I remember a lot of stories have come out. Some of the stories that are out there are true, some are not, but it's important to put out the right story, put out the correct information, because when I go online and I see something, I jump on it. I believe, oh, it's, you know, it's the truth, and then I run with it. But make sure that the right stories are out there for consumers to see and read about, and then we can then share that information with others. Word of mouth is also a good way to share information. So when I hear something, I'm gonna call Tiana and say, hey, I saw this online. Is it true? What do you think? You know, so making sure the right information is out there. There are groups on Facebook and we chat a lot, but making sure that somebody is not putting out the wrong thing. You know, we make assumptions about the information we see and we believe that that's the truth. It's just making sure that the right information.
We lost you. I think you may be on mute.
Hello? Okay.
Yes.
You can hear me, okay. So anyway, a few months ago, there was a video on 60 Minutes about gene therapy, and then people took and ran with it, the negative side of the story, and it was all over Facebook and Instagram and whatnot. But my point is just making sure the right information is out there, because when I hear it, I believe that that's the truth, and it may not be. Just ensuring the right information is out there for people to learn about these clinical trials and the benefits. And then also connecting them with past patients, good or bad, the success stories or not, so that people see the reality that these clinical trials may work for one person, but not the other. And knowing that, you know, I hear this side of the story as well as that side, and I can make an informed decision.
You have given us such great information, and I want to go around and make sure that everybody has a chance to speak too, but I just can't, I have to ask a follow-up question, or for you all to address this in your responses. Who do you think should participate in getting that correct information out? What organization, what entity, who is that trustworthy source that you all think this information should be coming from? So thank you, Jennifer. I'm gonna circle back to you, but I'm going to also ask Tiana to comment, and then Ms. Stephanie and Ms. Shirley.
Oh, wow, that's such a good question. Like Jennifer was saying, we are such a close-knit community and we go directly to each other for information. So I think it's important that we do put this information out on social media. I know most of the information I get about clinical trials comes from sitting in conferences like this, but everybody doesn't come to conferences. So having that out there on social media, I think that the CBOs are really trusted in this community. So if, you know, we can do better about dispersing information through them and then they can put it out there, I think that that would be really effective.
Thank you. Ms. Stephanie, anything to add?
Yes, I would like to say in terms of the information also, everything that everyone said, I'm in total agreement. It's a great idea to use. You know, also with sharing and making sure that the patients in the clinical trials, the ones that have really gone through it, they can really share the information and put it out there, like using the different avenues like social media to do it, or, you know, conferences, or going to the, you know, doctor's offices. Sometimes I know I used to do like talks myself, spreading out prenatal care, healthy prenatal care, by going to different doctor's office, or, you know, having an already audience there. But I mean, the people that's part of the clinical trials, I think, that have had the experience, if they could be the ones, like with sharing their stories, like was said before, putting it out there that others would be able to see and know the truth.
Thank you. So transparency. Ms. Shirley?
Yeah, I think social media has really increased awareness in a certain age group, so that they find out a lot more than they did before. But there are also various committees, I'm on a few, where they are taking that information and putting it in more of a readable form, because everybody can't understand the information on clinicaltrials.gov.
Correct.
So other people need to be able to decipher that information, and there are committees working on that very same thing, because I've been a part of those committees. So I think that helps, but I think all of us need to take the responsibility to get the correct information out there and help to educate the community, because that's the only way we'll all benefit. If we all work together, if we all give information, we will all benefit. And it's just not fair to me to leave my fellow man behind when I have all this knowledge. You know, you got to share it. So I think that we do a good job in our community and the circle that we have, and we rely on one another to help us and to guide us in the right area. But there's going to be more and more information out there, and we just have to tell people where to find it. And I believe they'll go there and they'll be educated too.
So I can't say anything but other than the power of the patient voice. And even though I don't like using the term patient, because individuals living with sickle cell disease are first children, young adults, and adults.
Right.
And one of the things, though, I think that is very, very important, though, is the role that you all have in the clinical trial process. So I'm going to go around the room and just ask you all to say anything that you feel wasn't said, that needs to be said. But I just want to advocate to this community to be involved in the clinical trial process, from the design of the clinical trial to selecting endpoints for clinical trials. And I know many of you have participated in those endpoints committees. Also to be on IRBs, these institutional review boards, as a community representative. Also to really speak out and advocate about the education that needs to happen, about the feedback that needs to happen at the end of the trial, and the inclusivity about some of these trials for various reasons, not just age, but gender, and to represent those interests of women and men where fertility preservation is concerned. We have heard so much from you. I'm trying to think of what else. And then of course the mental health aspect, to make sure that there is a behavioral health, mental health specialist, particularly when the trials are involving curative therapies.
Right.
I think needs to happen. And I think the other thing that you all mentioned also was to advocate for having time to really digest this information that's been presented to you, and to prepare for whatever the trial has coming forward. So those were some of the themes and some of the take-home messages that I got. Please, is there anything that you all would like to share? We have like 1 minute left, but is there anything that you all feel that you didn't get a chance to share?
I would like to say, in getting more males involved with sickle cell. I mean, I worked as a substance abuse counselor, and I met a guy that had sickle cell, and he, because of what he was going through, he turned to drug. Well, because of, you know, having to suppress his pain, he really got on drugs real bad. But I'm saying you don't see that many, you know, even at conferences, many guys. We need to really get the word out so that they can feel more part too of this process of building productive and better lives.
Exactly. Ms. Shirley, I think you were going to say something as well.
Yeah, I was just going to answer a question that was in the chat about are curative therapies good to consider in adulthood? And I would say, yes, they are. Even myself at 64 would consider gene therapy. So I just don't want people to be held back by fear or anything else. You know, take advantage of the opportunities you have out there.
Ms. Jennifer, anything to say, to add?
Yes, I agree with Miss Shirley. I did my stem cell transplant when I was 37, and I have no regrets going through it. But my suggestion is when it's presented to you, don't look at the end result of being cured, because before you get the cure, there's a process, a grueling process to go through. That can be taxing not only on you physically, but on your family as well. So consider all of that before you make your decision.
Thank you. Ms. Wolford, I'm going to end with you.
Okay, well, I don't want to take us too far over time, you guys. I was on a mission, and I think I really said everything that I wanted to say, but I do just want to close out by saying that this is an incredible time to be a patient and to be an advocate in the sickle cell disease space, and just how exciting it is that we even have precedent to have conversations like this, that we finally have options. So I'm excited.
Well, thank you, panelists, for your participation, for your wisdom, for sharing your personal stories. As a moderator, I'm supposed to remind everybody to rate today's session, go to agenda, view the session, and select rate the session to give your feedback. Remember that there are recorded sessions that are available online. And I think we're going to move on to our closing ceremony. So panelists, thank you again.
Thank you for having us.